Hi, welcome to Integrative Preparedness. I'm Steve Smith. I've been kind of busy here the last couple of weeks, so I haven't had a chance to get on here. I shot one last week that turned out to be too long once I watched it, and so I'm separating that into probably 3 or 4 shorter ones. I think that's better for watching. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between training and experience, and why that difference is crucial. I'm going to put in a story about Bruce Lee for anybody who click on this to see that. I will say that in the last few days we've had those shootings, and now we're in the middle of this uproar about the president and his statements about gun control. I'm not going to get into that on this one. A lot of other people have already weighed in. I'll give my opinion here. This is the mug that I drink my coffee out of every day. It's the Second Amendment, and there's a line on there, the last one, that says shall not be infringed, and just go to the dictionary and see what infringed means, and you have my opinion on it. There's no secret to what's causing this stuff, and there's no secret to stopping it. And I might do one on the other channel about that when I get a chance. Anyway, the importance of the difference between training and experience, and the importance of recognizing that importance. I said, I think in one that I shot sometime back, I mentioned that I used to own a gym, and I taught combatives at that gym, and I'd had some young guys come in and ask me if I taught grappling, and at the time I didn't know why they were interested in grappling, but after a few came in and I asked them about it, then that's when they told me about the UFC, and they, I think I mentioned I had this one youngin, young guy about 19 or 20, obviously inexperienced in the world, who looked at me like I was an idiot and asked me, well, don't you know that 90% of all street fights end up on the ground? Well, when they did this, I looked in, and so I would ask these guys, I said, well, what is this no holds barred? MMA wasn't a term that was used quite yet. It was the no holds barred. And I said, well, I'm not familiar with that, because I hadn't kept up on the fight game. And so they told me about it. This stuff, they said, is just there's no rules, and people get in there and they can do anything. And I thought, well, there have to be rules. Well, no, there's no rules. They can do anything. I said, well, if there's no rules, how come I'm not hearing about people being killed all the time or maimed and all? Well, because these people are in such good shape. That's why they don't get killed. And I would ask him, I said, well, how do you train an eyeball so that I can't take it out? And how do you train a knee so that I can't break it 3 different directions when I kick it? How do we do that? Well, they didn't know. They just knew that somehow this was real, and these guys were just such great warriors. That's why they weren't getting killed. Well, anyway, so I watched a little bit of it, and I found it interesting. This was the first of the UFC. And it was a good sport, but I saw, obviously, that it wasn't real, and that there were rules. As a matter of fact, Ken Shamrock told me several years later about how they had changed the rules on him a couple of times when he was going to fight Hoist Gracie. And that was back when Horian was one of the owners, and it was kind of being used as a vehicle to promote Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. Anyway, I would have even my beginning students watch tapes of the UFC fights, and the way that I would teach, and the way that most people of my ilk anyway would teach, when a student came to me and they began training, I would have them from the very beginning learn how the body was put together. They had to learn the skeletal system, the muscular system, how the bones were attached, the articulations, which just is a fancy word for joint, how those are attached one to the other with ligaments, and how the bones were attached to the skeletal system by tendons. Because if you don't know how something's put together, you're not going to know how to take it apart. It's kind of like blowing a bridge. If you don't know how the bridge is built, if you don't know where the supports are, where the stresses are, you can just put a big, bunch of C4 or Simtex or whatever on, just put it on the bridge and let her go, and you might bring it down or might not. You'll end up with a big mess. By the same token, if you know how the bridge is constructed and you know where the stresses are and where the supports are, you can place your charges and where you need to and pretty much drop that bridge where you want to with a minimum of expended force. And it's the same with combatives. If you don't know how the human body is put together, you can expend a lot of force and not have a lot of destructive result. And if you want to see kind of a perfect example of that, look at the last at a baseball fight. You ever seen one of these fights to where the bench is clear? Something happens. I'm not a big sports fan, but some pitcher beans somebody with a ball, and then both of the benches come out and have a big old fight right there in the middle of the field, right? And it goes on for a minute or two before, I don't know, either they stop it or they get tired or whatever, I don't know. But then they all go back to their benches. And have you ever noticed that nobody gets hurt? Nobody gets hurt bad. That much expended energy. And these guys, they're young guys. They ought to be, quite the studs and spend a lot of time in the weight room and all, full of testosterone and all that. And yet nobody gets hurt. Some of these people ought to come, I was going to say come off the field. Some of these people ought to have to be dragged off the field after that much energy is put into trying to hurt somebody, but they don't. So anyway, I would have my students watch these UFC fights, and I don't have anything against the UFC. I know some of the guys, and they're good guys, and I can enjoy watching a good match. But I would have them watch these fights and explain to me all of the different targets that were not being accessed on these fighters. Because the second thing that I would do with my students was, after they learned how the body was put together, then I would teach them, what are the targets, and the way that I taught was in four things. Target recognition, meaning what target are you going after? Target acquisition, how can you acquire that target? Weapons selection, meaning what are you going to use to destroy or try to impact that target? And then a weapons delivery. So that's simply, what is the weapon? Is it going to be a fist? Is it going to be a palm heel? Is it going to be fingers? And then how are you going to deliver that? So the way that I would teach this would be target recognition, target acquisition, weapon selection, or weapons delivery. Well, I would have them watch these fights and tell me where either of the fighters should have been able to access a target on the other one. And even my beginning students, after they'd been there for a month or two, would be able to list all sorts of targets that were not being accessed on the fighters by the other fighter. Okay. Well, this is because there were rules, or there were gentlemen agreements, or whatever, and the lesson there is that when you add a rule, you no longer have reality, although this was being promoted as reality. And I wrote an article about this in Grandmaster Magazine, probably in 1999 or 2000, explaining to where people were thinking about this was reality, but it wasn't. And I told them, if you want a little reality, then turn off half the lights, throw a bunch of broken cinder blocks in the middle of the cage, and some bricks and some broken beer bottles and mattress springs. It seemed like back in my day, I drug a lot of people out of a lot of places, and it seemed like down in the hood there was always these mattress springs laying all over the place. I didn't know why, but they were. And then put maybe a mean old dog, a Rottweiler or a Doberman or a Pit Bull, chained to the fence trying to break his leash to get at you while you're down there trying to trying to subdue this guy, and then you're going to approach a little bit of reality. I was talking about this to a friend of mine one day, and we were kind of laughing about it. And we were having dinner, and anybody who might be familiar with Jim Harrison, Jim is a legend of martial arts and combatives and survival and preparedness since the 60s. Most of you won't be familiar with him because he didn't go make movies and things, but the people that you know him. So we were having dinner at another friend's house one time, and I made the statement that I didn't think much of Bruce Lee, and I didn't know Lee, and so I was going off entirely what I'd seen in his movies, and Jim, who did know Lee very well, he said, "Well, how come?" And I said, well, I told him about, I saw a movie where Lee and some other guy jumped up in the air and they fought for a minute and then they landed back down on the ground. And so, I said, well, I didn't think much of that. And he said, well, he didn't remember seeing that, but he said Lee was a legit guy. And so he told me something about Lee. And so I went and read some of Lee's stuff, and it turned out that when I read, not the things written about Lee, but some of his instructional material. Once I read that stuff, I saw he knew exactly what he was talking about. He was a real scholar when it came to personal combatives, and it was surprisingly close to the way that I taught my own students, and the way that I think Jim taught his. But he told me a story about Lee one time. They were in a dojo somewhere. I don't remember where it was, and Lee was working with the nunchucks. Now Lee is very famous for his nunchuck work, and as a matter of fact, Lee said that Jim's son Lance was one of the best he had ever seen with the nunchucks. But so he was practicing. Of course, he did everything in the air, and Jim suggested, well, hit that, hit this bag, and they had a bunch of Muay Thai bags hanging there, and those things, if you know what they are, they're very heavy, very tall, very very heavy, and they don't have a lot of give to them. You gotta put a lot into them to make them move, although they're denser as it gets lower, as over the years it kind of settles, and so Jim would say, well, we'll hit this bag, with those chucks. And he said Lee did. And that chuck, when it hit that bag, it came right back and bounced and nailed him right in the forehead, almost knocked him out. Well, the lessons of those two things, of the UFC or the cage fighting with rules, and the lesson of Lee bouncing that chuck off a bag is kind of the same, and that is when it's not real, it's very forgiving. Okay, met with real resistance, or in Lee's case, the resistance of a bag, and in the case of the UFC, it would be met with somebody who is really trying to take their life. Things work out a lot differently. There are a lot of people out there in the preparedness world, and I see also with the guns, a lot of the guys that are always working with the guns. They're training a lot, and if that's all you can do, then that's great. I mean, training always beats not training. But without the experience to really understand where that training is supposed to take you, the training is very limited in its scope and its ability to take you to the next step. Training, as I've said before, the purpose of training is to give you the elemental abilities to hopefully stay alive and then learn from experience being the true teacher. There aren't many places to get experience anymore in life. We live a safe world. But if you can get experience, then you want to. And so that's why I'm going to suggest that for those of you who train, get out of your training comfort zone, because once you're doing pretty well in a training situation, it's easy to fool yourself to think that you're ready for reality. And you know, the training, the weapon doesn't make you ready for reality. It's your mind that makes you ready for reality. So I would suggest that you get, you know, some experience. The places to go, and this is mainly going to be the police and the military, and I don't recommend that people go into the police or the military anymore. Young guys come to me and they ask me about it and want me to train them in preparation for it, and I kind of anymore I don't, because I tell them that they're going to be probably fairly well trained, but then they're going to be, you know, and many times ill-led, ill-commanded, maybe well-equipped and maybe not, and they'll never know the real reasons for what they're being asked to do. But if what you want is experience, then those are the places to go. Other than that, if you don't do that, if you can't do that, try to find somebody who has the experience, and get to know them, and try to soak up. And when you're talking to them or when you're trying to learn from them, just kind of be a sponge. Try not to be the guy who's talking tough all the time, you know, because if you are, you're not going to learn anything, for two reasons. That first off, you've shown that your mind is not open to learning, and secondly, because nobody will really want to talk to you much and share, you know, their experiences with you after a certain point. The point of this is that as things look like they're going to get more and more serious here in the future, you want to be able to deal with reality. And training is better than nothing, but it's not getting you ready to deal with reality. Experiences, okay, whether it's your own experience or to the extent that you can learn from the experience of another, you've got to make a mental jump from thinking that you're, you know, a training killer to really a bedrock understanding of what violent encounter is, violent combatives are, what it's really like when you're up against somebody who's trying to take your life away from you. And this isn't just a street fight. This is someone trying to take your life away from you. And very often, the only way to keep them from taking yours from you is taking theirs from them. And don't get excited about that. And I'm speaking here to some young guys who I've kind of talked to. Don't get excited about that. Don't think that that's something really cool. Understand the seriousness of that. But if you're serious about preparedness and you're serious about survival, you have to get serious about these life and death, potential life and death scenarios, and prepare yourself for the reality of it. So get away from this posturing, and get away from the tough talk, and get away from wanting to flash your gun all the time. Okay? And stay away from those who do. And go down several layers deeper to where you develop an understanding of what real life and death and reality is. So with that, I'm going to make a couple more here about the other issues that were in that other one. But my guru says I've already gone far longer on this than I intended to. It's the best I can do, because these things aren't necessarily, quick studies. So anyway, get out there. Get out of the training mindset and get into the learning mindset. And with that, I'll say goodbye and remind you that we train well today in order to live well tomorrow. And if we don't take that training to the next step of understanding, of reality, the training is not going to do for you what you want to. So have a good day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.